Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. This is Chris Newberry, and I attend C3 and live here in the Tri-Cities, but I'm a professional musician, drummer, and wanted to talk a little bit about kind of these next steps as they decide to kind of take the drum cage away from the drummers or unleash the drummer, free them from the cage to be on stage and to play kind of in a more natural acoustic environment. With that can come some challenges. It can create some challenges, and it can be tricky if we don't, if we're not mindful as drummers about how we approach the drums and how we approach playing with other people in kind of a smaller space. Most of you guys have had this experience before, so it's not a huge deal, but I'm going to cover just like a couple things that I can think of that would be helpful. And you know, when we're in a cage, one thing that it allows for us to do is it kind of allows for us to really like flex a little bit and play out and hit the drums pretty hard, hit the cymbals pretty hard. But there's a couple challenges with that, or there's a couple things to think about with all of that. And I think the first thing I would talk about is just being aware with your ears, having your ears open so that you can hear how your sound is fitting in with the other musicians on stage. That's like the number one. That's like the overarching factor for how we should play as all musicians. And so making sure that, is my volume as a drummer appropriate with the bass player next to me or the guitar players and all that stuff. And if we have in-ear monitors in, which we do most of the time on stage, there's a little bit of a balancing act, making sure that you have your monitors set at the right level so that you can hear everybody else. Sometimes we have ourselves too high in the mix, or too hot in the mix, and that causes us to not hear everybody else as well. And sometimes it can actually we can actually do the opposite, where we have everything else really loud in our mix, like the vocals and guitars and bass, and we don't have ourselves loud enough. So we end up having to play louder to overcompensate for the fact that we just don't have ourselves turned up loud enough in the mix. So that's one concept. The next thing I would talk about briefly is the way we hit the drums. And I can demo this just a little bit, but making sure that when we're playing, just from a technical standpoint, we're not squeezing the stick super tight. Because if we're squeezing the stick really tight, we're gonna get kind of an abrasive sound from the drum. And what we really want is we want the drum to speak. And part of that, the tone that we can get from the drum, is by having a looser grip. So by no means will I say like take your fingers off the stick, but just making sure that your fingers are around the stick. And this is what I call a closed hand position. And then this is like an open hand position. So using a combination of this. So if I hit the drum, I can hit the drum really loud. And if I squeeze the stick's gonna stop down here at the drum. But I can also, you can kind of see how my fingers are letting the stick rebound. And what that does is it allows for the drum to sing a little bit more, and allows us to not have to hit, we really don't have to hit the drum that hard. The other thing I would say about just how hard we hit the drums, we need to allow the sound guy, we need to allow Jason or whoever's running sound to have good control of what the drums sound like. So if we're hitting the drum and we're squeezing really tight and hitting the drum and basically bashing all the tone out of the drum, then the sound guys are they're gonna have a more difficult time adjusting and mixing the actual drum sounds themselves. So making sure that we don't have to play loud, but we can play appropriate level. Same with all the instruments we play. You know, you can get a fatter sound using the shaft of the stick on the edge of the hi-hat. You can get all sorts of different sounds there. But everything we do, cymbals are sometimes a little bit out of our control, but there's a difference between just playing through a cymbal and what I call finessing a cymbal. So if I hit this cymbal over here and I go, and I play through the cymbal, it's going to be louder, more abrasive. But if I can hit the cymbal and come up off of it like touching a hot stove, it's gonna kind of create a more darker, warmer sound that's with less volume but still has good clarity of sound. And so you can play. I could just play a little bit, but like. That's probably going to be a fairly good volume for most of the stuff that we're doing on stage. And then you let the mics, you got to let the mics do the job of amplifying that out to the audience. We don't have to do that as the drummer. A lot of times we play a lot of like tom type stuff. We kind of do that stuff. That's another opportunity. A lot of times what I hear is from drummers, they play so loud that the drums kind of get this slappy sound. And sometimes it's the heads. The heads are so beat up that it's just kind of this papery, wet sound. But we can also do the same kind of finesse stroke. Play super loud, but we can let the tone of the drums, and once again, letting the mics do the work as far as amplifying. So I would almost say, think about, as we're playing on a stage with other musicians, think about letting the sound guy bring the volume up of the drums, and we're just creating the tone and the textures. It's still up to us to create the dynamics, meaning we're playing accents. Dynamics, the sound guy will be able to adjust all that. So anyway, those are some thoughts just like technically regarding playing in that format. The other thing I would say too is what's a cool thing, and there's a couple drummers I want to maybe share with you. The first guy is a guy named Aaron Sterling, and he's probably one of the most recorded drummers in the world right now. He lives in LA. Basically just runs a recording studio out of his house, and he's played on almost every big time record I can think of in the last probably 10 years. But he talks a lot about when he records, sometimes what he'll do is he'll turn the gain on the mics or the interfaces. He'll turn the gain up really high, and then he'll play really, really soft, or he'll even sometimes play with like his fingertips. But the gain is so hot on the mic that it just, when he manipulates the sounds later, it just sounds super huge. So that's kind of a fun idea to experiment, and he does that with like floor toms. So using the technology that we have to enhance the sound as well. But he's another great example of somebody that doesn't bash. He's not a super bash drummer. But he plays with a lot of finesse and gets a lot of work for doing that. You can check him out. I think he's toured with John Mayer on his last couple tours. But that guy's name is Aaron Sterling, and he does a lot of really good demos on his Instagram channel about recording and playing and some of his thoughts, and he's pretty hilarious too. The other person I want to share with you is the legendary Steve Gadd. Who's played with everybody, Paul Simon, Sting, Eric Clapton, played with all sorts of legendary people. And I remember hearing a quote one time from somebody that sat behind him during a concert or a recording session. And their takeaway from watching him play was they were shocked at how quiet he played. So every time he'd play, this quote, this guy was talking about how it had so much finesse that, but lacked in the volume, which allows for the mics, once again, a good sound guy, which we have at the church, allows for them to do their job. The other thing I was going to say too is like a couple little tricks we can do. A lot of times the snare drum is something that gets really loud very easily. So a couple things we can do is we can detune the snares. We can turn them way down and get that kind of like that analog 70s, 80s goosh sound. A friend of mine calls it it says it's like hitting a birthday cake with a baseball bat sound. Goo, goo. And you can get that like really kind of deep, low pitch sound that's actually really quiet. And there are a couple ways to do that is, one is to just detune the drum a lot and then put some sort of muffling on it. You can do that. You can also put like, if you have like a t-shirt or like a bandana, you can set that over the drum. Another thing you can do is if you have like an old record, you can set a record on your drum, but really there's a company out called Big Fat Snare Drum, and they have these little plastic drum head shaped items, and they come in all different shapes, or not shapes, but sizes and textures. And you can set that on your drum and it'll get that low pitched, quieter sounding snare drum for you too. So that could be something that we try as well. And I had another thought too, I'm trying to remember it. Big fat snare drum, detune the drums, add some like padding to it. So you could take like some gaff tape and with like, sometimes you use like Kleenex or a towel or something. You can get that really low sound. But that's an idea. Detuning the snare drum, that'll help a lot with volume. And then just making sure, like I said at the very beginning, with the technique, making sure that you're just letting the drums speak and letting the sticks do the work and letting the sound guy capture the sound, the natural sound that's being created. So those would be my takeaways on playing softer, I guess you could say, within the context of a stage. But really the key to everything is your ears and listening to your other fellow musicians. And yeah, no need to just unleash fury on stuff. And I know we have great drummers at the church, so I think this is all stuff you guys know. But Pastor Roland asked me to give some feedback, so or give some ideas as we do this. So hopefully this is helpful. Please hit me up. You can send me a message on Instagram. I think it's just Chris Newberry Music. Shoot me an email, text if you have my number or whatever. Would love to chat with you, love to hang out, love to talk drums. So appreciate it, and best of luck